Eliza Hartwell set the tray down on the table, looked Richard Caldwell directly in the eye, and said in front of every person in that room, "I would rather die unknown than be chosen by a man who only picks what nobody else wanted." The room stopped breathing. Richard had just told 30 people that she was the last choice, the remainder. The woman left over when every worthier woman was already taken. He had said it like it was simply a fact, like she was furniture, like she was weather. He had not expected her to answer. He had not expected the richest cowboy in Wyoming to walk through the door 10 seconds later. This story will surprise you until the very last word. Subscribe to our channel, follow along to the end, and comment your city below. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. Wyoming Territory. 1885. Red Hollow. Eliza Hartwell had been carrying things her entire life. Trays at community gatherings. Ledger books at her father's shop. The weight of a town's opinion pressing down on her shoulders since the day she turned old enough for people to start asking why no man had chosen her yet. She was 25 years old. In Red Hollow, that was not a number. That was a verdict. The gathering at the Caldwell house happened every third Saturday of the month. Margaret Caldwell, wife of the town's wealthiest banker, opened her parlor to what she called the community, though everyone understood that invitation meant the people she approved of, which meant the people with money, or the people useful to those with money, or the people whose presence made Margaret feel generous by comparison. Eliza was none of those things. She was there because her father, Thomas Hartwell, had repaired the Caldwell family's furniture, their clocks, and their account books for 15 years without ever once sending an incorrect invoice. And Margaret Caldwell, whatever else she was, understood that loyalty from a tradesman deserved occasional acknowledgement, even if that acknowledgement looked like allowing his daughter to carry refreshments at her parties. So Eliza came. She wore her best dress, which was not very fine. She pinned her brown hair back, the way she had seen the banker's wife do it in a portrait that hung above the fireplace. She told herself, the way she always told herself before these gatherings, that she would not let anything bother her tonight. She was wrong, the way she was always wrong about that. Richard Caldwell was 28. Handsome in the easy way of men who had never worked a day without someone else making their work easier, and he had been courting Eleanor Marsh for 6 weeks, which meant he currently felt himself to be the type of man whose opinion on women carried a certain authority. He was holding a glass of bourbon and standing in the center of the room, which was where Richard Caldwell always stood, because the center of every room was where he believed he belonged when he made the announcement that would alter the rest of Eliza Hartwell's life. He did not plan it that way. He was simply filling silence the way men like him always do, by making someone else smaller. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" he said loudly to the 3 men standing closest to him, but truly to the entire room. There are 2 kinds of women in this world. Nobody asked him to continue. He continued. There's the kind a man sets his eyes on the moment she walks through a door. The kind he fights other men for. The kind that makes him feel like he's earned something just by standing next to her. A few of the men nodded. Their wives studied the floor. "And then," Richard said, and his voice shifted just slightly, just enough, "there's the other kind." He turned, slowly, and every person in that room knew exactly where his eyes would land. Eliza felt it before she saw it. That particular quality of attention, the kind that isn't admiration, but is performing admiration's opposite. She was holding a silver tray of lemonade glasses standing near the far window, and she had been doing a very good job of being invisible until this moment. The other kind, Richard continued looking directly at her, is simply what remains when everyone else has already said yes to someone worthier. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people pretending not to hear. The sharp, airless quiet of 30 people, all making the same calculation at the same moment. Do I look at Richard? Or do I look at her? Most of them looked at neither. Eliza stood completely still. The tray did not shake. Her hands were steadier than she felt they had any right to be. She thought about her father, who had a cough this winter that frightened her, who had said last night that his hands hurt too much to hold the ledger pen, who needed her to come home tonight with enough dignity left to still believe tomorrow was worth facing. She thought about all the mornings she had watched Red Hollow wake up and convinced herself that a town was not a permanent judgment. She thought about the way Richard Caldwell had looked at her. And then she stopped thinking, and she spoke. "I would rather be nobody's choice," Eliza said clearly, in a voice that did not waver, "than be chosen by someone who measures a person's worth by how quickly another man wanted her first." The silence became a different kind of silence. Richard's expression flickered. Just once. Just for a moment, a small crack in the easy confidence of a man who was not accustomed to having his performances interrupted. "Well," he said, recovering, smiling at the men beside him like they were sharing a private joke. "The unmarried ones always have the sharpest tongues. It's what they develop instead of—" The front door opened. Richard didn't finish his sentence. Nobody was listening to it anymore. The man who walked through the door of Margaret Caldwell's parlor that evening was not a man anyone expected to see at a third Saturday gathering. Nathaniel Blackwood did not attend social gatherings. This was not an opinion. It was a documented fact. 3 years of documented fact beginning the autumn. His wife Clara died of fever, and ending apparently. Right now this Saturday in Margaret Caldwell's parlor, where he stood in the doorway, wearing a working man's coat over a clean shirt, hat in hand. Looking around the room, the way a person looks when they are searching for something specific, and have not yet decided whether they'll find it. He was 34 years old. He was tall in a way that came from work and not from vanity. His hands were the hands of a man who operated a cattle ranch with 3,000 acres personally, not from a desk. His face was the face of a man who had lost something and kept moving anyway, not because the loss healed, but because stopping would have felt like adding one more casualty. Blackwood Ranch was the largest operation in the Wyoming Territory. The Blackwood name was on the post office, the water rights agreement, the deed to half the grazing land within 40 miles. When Nathaniel Blackwood walked into a room, bankers straightened their spines, and fathers of unmarried daughters suddenly remembered they had daughters. But Nathaniel Blackwood did not look at the banker. He did not look at the daughters. He looked at Eliza Hartwell. "I believe," he said to the room, but with his eyes on her, "the woman standing by that window has more courage than everyone else in here combined." 30 people turned and looked at Eliza Hartwell for the second time in 3 minutes. The difference this time was the direction of the weight. Richard Caldwell set down his bourbon glass, very carefully, the way a man sets something down when he needs his hands free, but does not want to appear as though he needs his hands free. "Nathaniel," he said with the careful warmth of a man recalculating, "we didn't expect you this evening." "I imagine you didn't," Nathaniel said. He walked across the room. People moved out of his way without appearing to move the way water adjusts around something that enters it with certainty. He stopped in front of Eliza. He was close enough that she could see the calluses on his left hand from the fence wire and the line where his hat sat on his forehead, and the fact that his eyes were the particular gray of a Wyoming sky in October, the color that came before weather. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "You know who I am?" Eliza said. It came out as a statement, rather than a question, which surprised her. "Thomas Hartwell's daughter," he said. "Your father repaired 3 clocks and a set of account ledgers for my foreman last spring. He charged less than he should have, and the work was better than he advertised." "He doesn't advertise," Eliza said. "That's what I mean," Nathaniel said. Behind them, Richard Caldwell had not moved. He was standing very still in the way of a man trying to decide whether the situation required him to assert himself or quietly recede. He was calculating. Nathaniel Blackwood's ranch bordered his father's bank on 3 significant loan agreements. This required management. "Nathaniel," Richard said, moving toward them with the smooth ease of a man used to redirecting conversations. "I was just saying something in jest. Miss Hartwell and I have known each other for years. Haven't we? Eliza?" Eliza looked at him. "We have," she agreed. "Long enough for me to know the difference between something said in jest and something said because you meant it and wanted an audience." Richard laughed the particular laugh of a man who is not amused. "Well, she does have a sharp tongue, as I was." "I heard what you were saying," Nathaniel said. Richard stopped. "I heard it from the hallway," Nathaniel continued. before I opened the door." He looked at Richard with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely final. I thought about walking away, and then I decided I'd rather walk in. The room understood what had just happened. Margaret Caldwell, who had excellent social instincts, immediately appeared at Nathaniel's elbow with a glass of lemonade and an invitation to come speak with her husband about the spring cattle agreement, which artfully separated the moment from what it was becoming. Nathaniel excused himself politely, but before he turned away from Eliza, he said quietly enough that only she could hear, "Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. You're not built for it." And then he was gone across the room. Eliza stood by the window holding her tray. Her face was still warm. But for the first time all evening, and perhaps for the first time in a very long while, the warmth was not from shame. She did not sleep that night. This was not unusual. Eliza spent most nights running numbers in her head, her father's accounts, the quarterly payments on the building lease, the cost of the medicine that kept his cough manageable through winter. She had a mind that did not slow easily, and she had long since learned to use the sleepless hours productively rather than fighting them. But tonight, the numbers kept interrupting themselves with the memory of a voice. "Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are." She thought about that on the walk home from the Caldwell house. She thought about it while she checked that her father was sleeping soundly, his breathing easier tonight than it had been yesterday. She thought about it while she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, looking at the ledger she had been correcting for 3 days. Her father's repair shop had been profitable once. It was not profitable now, not because Thomas Hartwell had lost his skill. His work was still the finest in Red Hollow, and everyone who brought him a broken clock, or a warped door, or a set of damaged accounts knew they were getting something worth more than they were paying. The problem was simpler and harder than skill. Thomas Hartwell's hands were failing, slowly, then less slowly. The rheumatism that had started in his knuckles 2 years ago had moved through both hands with the quiet, systematic determination of a creditor collecting a debt that had always been owed. He could still do fine work. On good days, the number of good days was decreasing. Eliza had been doing the accounts for 18 months. Her father did not know the full extent of what the numbers said. She had made decisions about what to tell him and what to carry herself, and she was not certain those decisions were right, but she had made them, and she was living inside them now. The shop had 3 months of comfortable operation left. After that, she would need to find something. She had not yet told her father. She was still trying to find the right answer before she delivered the right information, because Thomas Hartwell was a man who took bad news as a personal failure, and she did not want him to believe he had failed her. She closed the ledger. She went to bed. She did not stop thinking about October gray eyes and a voice that had not lowered itself to be kind. The morning brought Mrs. Haskell. Mrs. Haskell was 62 years old, had buried 2 husbands, operated the town's only seamstress shop with the efficiency of a military general, and had strong opinions about nearly everything, which she expressed with complete confidence and no particular concern for whether the opinions were requested. She arrived at the repair shop at 8 in the morning with a coat that needed new buttons and a set of information she had gathered between last night and now. "You certainly stirred things up," she announced, settling herself into the customer chair across from Eliza's work table. "Half the town is talking about what you said to Richard Caldwell." "I'd rather they weren't," Eliza said without looking up from the accounts she was reviewing. "The other half is talking about what Nathaniel Blackwood said." Mrs. Haskell set the coat on the table. 4 buttons on each sleeve, same style as the originals if you have them. She paused. "Do you have any idea why that man came to a social gathering for the first time in 3 years, specifically to defend a woman he's never spoken to? He said my father did good work for his foreman, Eliza Jane Hartwell." Mrs. Haskell looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who has long since given up on subtlety. "Nathaniel Blackwood has had accounts with half the businesses in Red Hollow for 15 years. He has never once showed up to anyone's parlor gathering to comment on the quality of their work." Eliza finally looked up. "I don't know why he came," she said honestly. And I'm not going to build a theory about it, because building theories about rich men's intentions is how women end up disappointed. Mrs. Haskell studied her. That, she said finally, is either very wise or very sad, and I haven't decided which. Both, Eliza said. Probably both. The door opened. The button conversation ended. So, he came the next morning. Nathaniel Blackwood walked into Thomas Hartwell's repair shop at 9:45 on a Tuesday, which was unusual because men of his position typically sent their foremen on errands rather than making them personally. And it was the kind of entrance that caused old Samuel Pruitt, who was waiting for his pocket watch, to nearly fall off the customer bench in his haste to stand up straighter. Thomas Hartwell was in the back room. Eliza was at the counter. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. She set down her pen. She did not let herself react to the fact that her heart had performed a sudden and undignified movement at the sound of the door. "Is something broken that needs repairing?" "No," he said. "Then what can we help you with?" Nathaniel Blackwood put his hat on the counter between them. It was a plain hat, good quality, worn with real use. He looked at her for a moment, in the quiet, direct way she was already, after exactly one previous encounter, beginning to recognize as simply how he looked at things he was genuinely considering. "I have a proposal," he said. Old Samuel Pruitt made a sound. Nathaniel glanced at him. "Not that kind of proposal, Samuel." Samuel Pruitt composed himself. "I need someone to manage Blackwood Ranch's financial records," Nathaniel said. He looked back at Eliza. "The books, specifically. Not the cattle operations, I have people for that. The accounting, the supply orders, the payroll records and the expense logs and the quarterly reports." Eliza kept her face very still. "Why?" she said. "Because something is wrong." "Wrong how?" "The ranch is losing money," he said. "Not catastrophically, not obviously, just consistently. Every quarter for 2 years. Small amounts at first, larger amounts now." He paused. "My managers have 4 different explanations. Bad winter, low market prices, high supply costs, equipment failure. Every explanation is plausible. Every explanation is also exactly the kind of explanation that could cover something else." Eliza felt something in her mind click into focus, the particular sharpening that happened when she encountered a problem that was actually interesting. She had spent the last 18 months doing her father's books, and she knew what a real accounting problem looked and felt like. She also knew what an accounting problem that was designed to look like something else felt like. "You think someone is stealing from you?" she said. "I think it's possible." "And you want me to find it?" "I want someone I can trust to look," he said. "Someone whose loyalty I'm not already doubting." He met her eyes. "And someone who is good enough at this to see what's actually there, rather than what they're being told to see." Why me specifically? The question was not false modesty, it was genuine. Eliza knew she was competent. She had no patience for pretending otherwise. But there were men in Red Hollow with more experience, more credentials, more years of formal accounting work. She wanted to understand his reasoning because his reasoning mattered. Nathaniel picked up his hat. "Last night," he said, "I watched you stand in a room full of people who were waiting for you to be embarrassed, and instead of being embarrassed, you told the truth and made everyone else uncomfortable." He paused. "I've been surrounded by men who are very skilled at telling me what I want to hear. I need someone with a different skill set." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "You understand," she said carefully, "that a woman working at a man's ranch, a wealthy unmarried man's ranch, will become the subject of exactly the kind of talk that makes women's lives difficult." "Yes." "And you're asking anyway." "I'm offering," he said. "You decide." She thought about the ledger on her kitchen table, the 3 months of comfortable operation, her father's hands, the medicine costs. She thought about something else too, something she almost didn't let herself think, because she had trained herself very carefully not to want things she wasn't certain she could have. The thing was, she was good at this. She was genuinely, specifically, particularly good at finding the truth inside a set of numbers that someone had worked hard to obscure. She had known this about herself for years and had never once had a place to use it. "What does the position pay?" she asked. He named a figure. Old Samuel Pruitt inhaled sharply enough that his pocket watch fell on the floor. Eliza kept her face very still. "When do I start?" she said. Her father did not take it well. This was not a surprise. Thomas Hartwell had very fixed ideas about the proper order of things. Ideas that had been installed in him by his own father and reinforced by 30 years of living in a town where the proper order of things was monitored carefully by the people who benefited from it. A woman working at a widower's ranch was not in the proper order. "It isn't decent," he said from his chair by the window, and his voice carried the specific exhaustion of a man who knows he is losing an argument but has decided to lose it slowly. "It is work," Eliza said. "Good work. Work I'm qualified for. People will talk." "People are already talking, Papa. They've been talking my whole life. I've never done anything interesting enough to deserve it, and they talked anyway." Thomas looked at her. She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. She had decided the night before that she was going to tell him. Not everything, not the extent of the numbers, not the exact timeline, but enough that he understood why this mattered. "The shop needs 3 months, she said. "If everything stays the same, we have 3 months before we start making decisions we don't want to make." The silence was terrible. Thomas Hartwell looked at his hands. "I didn't know it was that close," he said. "I know you didn't." She kept her voice very steady. "I didn't want to worry you until I had something to tell you alongside the worry. Now I do." She looked at him. "Mr. Blackwood is paying well, fairly. More than fairly. It will help." Her father was quiet for a long time. "He's a good man," Thomas said finally, "from what I understand of him." "I believe he is," Eliza said. "But people will say things, Eliza." "I know. And it's never been easy, the things people say about you." "Papa?" She reached across the table and put her hand over his, over the swollen knuckles that broke her heart a little every time she looked at them. "I have spent 25 years letting people's words decide what I did with my life. I don't want to do that anymore." Thomas Hartwell looked at his daughter. He looked at her for a long time. "You sound like your mother," he said quietly. It was the highest compliment he ever gave anyone. "I'll take that," Eliza said. The ride out to Blackwood Ranch took 40 minutes by wagon. Eliza made it alone, which was a statement in itself, a statement she had not entirely planned, but was not going to apologize for. She had borrowed the Pruitt's Bay mare, and a small wagon that was not impressive, but was reliable. And she rode out on a Wednesday morning with her leather satchel and her best working clothes, and the complete and settled conviction that she was doing the right thing, even when everything in Red Hollow seemed to be watching her leave and calculating what it meant. She had miscalculated one thing. The ranch was enormous. She had known this intellectually. 3,000 acres, hundreds of cattle, the largest operation in the territory. She had processed these facts as numbers in a list. She had not processed what 3,000 acres actually looked like. She had not processed the scale of the working buildings, the bunkhouses, the storage facilities, the structures whose purpose she would need to be told. She had not processed the number of workers moving between buildings with the coordinated efficiency of an operation that ran on precision. She had not processed, and this was the part that struck her deepest, the silence at the center of it. The main house was large and well-maintained, which she expected. What she had not expected was the quality of the silence that surrounded it. Not the productive silence of a busy operation. Something else. The particular quiet of a place where the people were outside, and the inside had been undisturbed for a long time. Nathaniel met her at the front door. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He looked at her for a moment, that October sky look that she was learning did not mean distance, only attention. "Come in, I'll show you the records room." She followed him inside. She stopped in the entry hall. Because the entry hall of Blackwood Ranch's main house was lined on both sides with bookshelves, and the bookshelves were full, genuinely full, packed with books in no particular decorative arrangement, but with the honest disorder of a person who actually read them. And at the end of the hall was a dining table with one chair pulled out at its head, and a single place setting, and a single coffee cup from this morning still sitting at the one used spot. 1. Eliza looked at the table. She thought about what 3 years of one looked like. She followed Nathaniel Blackwood down the hall to the records room without saying anything. But something in her chest that had been carefully arranged and kept orderly for a long time rearranged itself just slightly around a new piece of information. The records room was a catastrophe, not dramatically, not in the way of obvious neglect or intentional destruction. It was the subtler catastrophe of systems designed by different people at different times, for different purposes, layered on top of each other without coordination like geological strata. "How many years of records are here?" Eliza asked. "I have 10 years I can account for," Nathaniel said. "There may be more before that." "Who managed these before?" "Victor Hale, my ranch manager." "How long has he been here?" 19 years. He was here when my father ran the ranch." Eliza looked at the shelves of ledgers. She looked at them the way she looked at a complicated problem, not with anxiety, but with the particular focused calm of someone who has done this before and knows that complicated problems yield to patience and method. "Where is Mr. Hale?" she asked. "He's out working the south pasture today. He'll be back this evening." "Does he know I'm here?" Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, just briefly. "I told him I was bringing someone in to help with the accounts. And he said it wasn't necessary." Eliza turned to look at him. "Did he say why?" "He said the accounts were fine, that the losses were explainable." Nathaniel paused. "He said it every time I asked, for 2 years." Eliza turned back to the shelves. "All right," she said. She set her satchel on the work table and opened it. She took out her pen and her own notebooks. "I'll start with the last 6 months and work backwards." She pulled the most recent ledger from the shelf. "I'll need to be able to ask questions as they come up." "I'll be available," Nathaniel said. "And Mr. Hale." A pause. "I'll let you manage what you need from him," Nathaniel said carefully. "But I'd like you to come to me first if you find something that concerns you." Eliza looked at him. She understood what he was asking without him having to say it plainly. He was asking her to trust his judgment about how to handle his own employee. He was asking her not to confront a situation without him. He was also, she understood, telling her something about what he suspected without wanting to say it out loud yet. "All right," she said. "I'll come to you first." Nathaniel nodded. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Miss Hartwell." "Yes." "Thank you for coming." He said it simply, not with the elaborate gratitude of someone performing appreciation, just directly like a fact. "It means something." Eliza looked at the shelves of complicated records and the problem waiting inside them. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Wait until I've found what's there." Nathaniel Blackwood left the room. Eliza opened the ledger. She started reading. And 3 pages and 3 pages into the first ledger she had ever touched, from Blackwood Ranch, she found the first small, careful, nearly invisible mistake. Not an accident. She could tell the difference between an accident and a choice. This was a choice. Her hand tightened on the pen. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook and wrote the date, the amount, and the category. She did not know yet how large this was going to be. But she knew with the particular certainty of someone who was very good at this specific thing that this was only the first one, and that Victor Hale had been doing this for a very long time. She turned to the next page, and the page after that. Outside the window, the Wyoming Territory spread wide and cold and honest under a sky the color of October. Inside, Eliza Hartwell, the woman nobody had chosen, the woman everyone had dismissed, bent over a ledger and began pulling a lie-apart thread by careful thread. She did not know yet that that the lie was bigger than one man's greed. She did not know yet what it would cost her to find the bottom of it. She did not know yet what it would save. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she was exactly where her abilities had always been trying to take her, and she was not going to waste it. The first week at Blackwood Ranch, nobody spoke to Eliza directly. Not the workers, not the cook, not the 3 ranch hands who passed the records room door a dozen times a day and never once looked through the open doorway as though looking would constitute an acknowledgement they had not yet decided to make. The only exception was a woman named May Dutton, cook housekeeper, and the person who had apparently run the domestic side of Blackwood Ranch through sheer force of will for 11 years. May was 53, wide-shouldered, and possessed of the particular directness that comes from spending decades feeding hungry men who had no interest in pleasantries. She appeared in the doorway of the records room on Eliza's second morning, carrying a coffee cup and a plate of biscuits, and she set them on the edge of the work table without being asked. "You take sugar," May said. "No," Eliza said. "Thank you." May looked at the papers spread across the table. She looked at the columns of figures Eliza had already begun cross-referencing in her own notebook. She did not say anything for a moment. Then, "You finding what you're looking for?" Eliza looked up. "I'm finding what's there." That's a careful answer. It's the honest one. May studied her the way women who have survived a long time study people they're trying to place. Not unkindly. Carefully. The last person who asked questions about these records was a man named Cooper. Came out from Cheyenne 2 years ago. Accountant trained proper. Left after 4 days. Eliza set down her pen. Why did he leave? Said the records were too disorganized to work with. Said it would take months and the cost wasn't worth it. May paused. Victor Hale told him the same thing the second day he was here. Said the whole system needed replacing and Cooper was welcome to start from scratch if he wanted. And Cooper left instead. Cooper left instead. Eliza picked her pen back up. The records aren't disorganized, she said. They're designed to look disorganized. May was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Well, she said, you need anything else, you come find me. She left. Eliza drank the coffee and kept working. By the end of the first week, she had filled 47 pages of her own notebook with cross-referenced figures, discrepancies, and questions. She had found 9 separate instances of what she was now privately calling irregularities, because she was not yet ready to use the harder word. Each one was small. Each one was explainable in isolation by the excuses Victor Hale's records offered: a supply cost increase, a cattle loss, a payment timing adjustment. But they were not isolated. They were patterned. And a pattern was not an accident. A pattern was a choice made repeatedly by someone who believed they were smarter than the person who would eventually read these numbers. Eliza had spent her entire adult life being underestimated. She understood better than most what it looked like when someone decided you weren't worth worrying about. Victor Hale had decided Nathaniel Blackwood wasn't worth worrying about. She was going to make sure that was the worst decision Victor Hale ever made. On Friday evening, Nathaniel knocked on the records room door. "How are you finding it?" he asked. He did not come fully into the room. He stood at the doorway, the way a person stands when they are respecting a space that has been claimed by someone else's work. "Complicated," Eliza said. "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." She looked at him. "I'm not ready to tell you what I think I'm finding yet. I need another week before I can say it with certainty." Nathaniel's expression did not change on the surface. But something behind it did something that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, but the particular quality of a man hearing confirmation of a fear he had been carrying alone for 2 years. "Is it bad?" he said. Eliza thought about the 47 pages. "I'll know in a week," she said. "I'll tell you everything then." Nathaniel nodded. He looked at the table covered in papers, the notebooks stacked at the edge, the systematic order that Eliza had imposed on the chaos. "You've reorganized the whole room," he said. "I needed to see it properly." Nobody's ever organized it before. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then, May says you work through the midday meal. I'm not hungry at midday. She also says you haven't taken a single break in 4 days. I take breaks. She says your definition of a break is switching which ledger you're reading. Eliza almost smiled. May pays attention. May pays attention to everything, Nathaniel said. She told me the year before Clara died. Said she could tell something was wrong before either of us admitted it. He stopped. The way he stopped abruptly, like he had walked through a door he hadn't meant to open, said more than the words that came before it. Eliza did not look away from him. I'm sorry about your wife, she said quietly. Nathaniel looked at the floor, then back up. Thank you. He said it simply, not with the polished grief of a man performing loss, but with the stripped-down flatness of someone who had said thank you for this too many times, for the words to carry much weight anymore, and was saying it again anyway, because the alternative was silence. I'll have something for you by next Friday, Eliza said. He nodded. He picked up his hat from the doorframe where he'd hung it when he knocked. Good night, Miss Hartwell. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. He left. Eliza turned back to the ledger. She did not think about the way he had said Clara's name. She was very deliberate about not thinking about it. She turned the page and kept working. She found the 11th irregularity at 11 o'clock that night. It was the largest one yet. She sat back in her chair. She pressed her hands flat against the table and looked at the number she had written in her notebook, and felt the cold, specific weight of knowing something you cannot yet prove, but can no longer pretend not to know. Victor Hale had not made a mistake. Victor Hale had been robbing Nathaniel Blackwood with precision and patience for at least 2 years. Probably longer. Probably much longer. And he had done it in the way of someone who knew exactly how much could disappear before anyone noticed, and had calculated his margin accordingly. And he had calculated wrong. Because nobody had ever sent Eliza Hartwell to read his numbers before. She closed the ledger. She would need the older records. She would need to go back further than 2 years. And she would need to do it without Victor Hale understanding what she was looking for, because the moment Victor Hale understood, she was looking, the evidence would start disappearing. She was going to have to be careful. She was going to have to be faster than he expected. She put her pen down, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside the ranch was dark and quiet, and the Wyoming sky above it was full of more stars than she ever saw from her father's shop in town, and she stood there for a moment and let herself feel not the anger, not the urgency, just the strange and unfamiliar sensation of being exactly the right person in exactly the right place. It was, she realized, the first time in her memory she had ever felt that. She let it last exactly 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. Victor Hale came to the records room on Monday morning. Eliza had been waiting for this. She had known it was coming. A man who had successfully concealed the things she was finding would not wait long before checking on the person who was looking for them. He knocked at the open door with the comfortable authority of a man on his own territory. Victor Hale was 58, heavy-set with the red-faced vigor of a man who worked hard and ate well and had for a long time felt entirely secure in his position. He had a foreman's hands and a politician's eyes, the kind that were always measuring the room, always finding the angle, always calculating the space between what was said and what was useful. Miss Hartwell, he said with the warmth of someone who has decided the best way to manage a problem is to make the problem feel welcome. I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. Victor Hale. I run the ranch operations. I know who you are, Eliza said pleasantly. Mr. Blackwood mentioned you. Good things, I hope. He smiled. It was a good smile, practiced and genuine-looking, and not genuine at all once you knew to look at the eyes. How are you settling in? These old records can be quite a puzzle, I'm afraid. I've been meaning to organize them properly for years. They're not so bad once you find the logic in them, Eliza said. What logic is that? She smiled back at him, the careful, pleasant smile of a woman who had spent her entire life learning to smile at men who were underestimating her. Every system has its own internal logic. You just have to find the pattern. Something moved behind Victor Hale's eyes. Just once. Just briefly. The look of a man who has heard a word he didn't expect and is deciding whether it means what he thinks it means. "Well," he said, "if you need any help interpreting the records, just come find me. I know every entry in these books personally." "That's very kind," Eliza said. "I'll certainly do that." Victor Hale left. Eliza waited until his footsteps were gone down the hall. Then she went to the shelf and pulled the oldest ledger she hadn't touched yet. She needed to work faster, she was right. She found the pattern in the older records on Wednesday, and when she found it, she had to put the book down and sit very still for almost a full minute. Because the number she was looking at, the total, the actual accumulated total, when she added every irregularity she had found across 4 years of ledgers, was not the number she had been expecting. It was 3 times the number she had been expecting. Victor Hale had not been skimming. Victor Hale had been systematically draining one of the most profitable ranches in the Wyoming Territory for 4 years at minimum, and possibly longer. And the total she was looking at was enough to have funded an entire separate operation, enough to buy land, enough to build something. Enough to make a man who worked for someone else very comfortable once that someone else no longer had a ranch to run. She sat with that understanding for exactly the 1 minute she allowed herself. Then she picked up her pen. She needed documentation. Every single entry cross-referenced with the supply invoices, the payroll records, the cattle transaction logs. She needed enough that when she presented it to Nathaniel, there would be no room for doubt. No angle of defense. No way for Victor Hale to claim confusion or error. She had 3 ledgers left to go through. She started immediately. She was 2 pages into the 3rd ledger that evening when May appeared in the doorway with supper on a tray. "You're staying again," May said. It was not a question. "I need to finish something," Eliza said without looking up. May set the tray down. She stood there for a moment, and Eliza could feel her looking not at the papers, but at her. "He trusts you," May said quietly. "Mr. Blackwood. He doesn't trust easily, hasn't since Clara, but he trusts you." Eliza looked up now. "I know," she said. "Whatever you're finding in those records." May paused. "He's going to need it to be the truth. All of it. Not a softened version. Not the parts that are easy. The whole thing." "I know that too." May nodded. She looked at the tray. "Eat while it's hot." She left. Eliza ate. She kept working. At 9 that night, the sound of boots in the hallway stopped outside the records room. Not May. The weight was different. She knew the sound of Nathaniel's walk, already knew the particular cadence of it, unhurried and direct, the walk of a man who had been covering large distances on foot and horseback his whole life. She did not look up from the ledger. "You work late," Nathaniel said from the doorway. "I work until it's done." "You've been here 12 hours. "I know." He came into the room, then actually into it, not just the doorway, and he sat down in the chair on the other side of the work table. He did not look at the papers. He looked at her. "Tell me something," he said. "Not the numbers yet. Just, is it what I thought it was?" Eliza looked at him across the width of the table. She had been thinking about this moment. About what she owed him in terms of honesty, and what she owed him in terms of letting the evidence be complete before she spoke. She had been arguing with herself about where that line was. Looking at him now, at the particular quality of a man who had been carrying a fear alone for 2 years, and was trying not to show how much the weight of it had cost him, she made her decision. "It's worse than you thought," she said. Nathaniel was very still. "How much worse?" "I'll have the full picture by the end of the week. But yes, what you suspected, it's real, and it's been going on longer than 2 years, and the amount is significant." She paused. "I'm sorry." He looked at the table. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs in the way of someone anchoring themselves. "Victor has been with this ranch 19 years, he said. He was my father's man before he was mine. I know. He sat at my table. He stood at Clara's funeral. His voice did not crack. It stayed level and quiet, which was somehow worse than cracking. He told me the losses were bad weather and bad markets. He told you exactly what he needed you to believe, Eliza said carefully. Nathaniel looked up at her. His eyes were the same October gray. But tonight there was something behind them. Not anger, not yet. Something rawer than anger. The particular devastation of a man who did not betray people and could not easily comprehend being betrayed by someone he had kept faith with. When you have it all, he said. The whole picture, you'll bring it to me first. Yes. Before you talk to anyone else. Yes. He nodded. He stood up. He picked up his hat, and he stood there for a moment, and she thought he was going to say something else, something about the ranch or the evidence or the next steps. But what he said was, "Thank you for not lying to me just now, for not softening it." "I don't lie to people who trust me," Eliza said. Nathaniel Blackwood looked at her with an expression she could not entirely name. Something that was not gratitude exactly, and not admiration exactly, but something that moved between them, like the moment before weather comes and you feel it on your skin before you see it in the sky. "No," he said. "I didn't think you did." He left. Eliza put her pen down. She sat in the quiet of the records room with the accumulated evidence of Victor Hale's 4-year betrayal spread across the table in front of her, and she thought about what she had just told a man who trusted her, and what it had cost him to hear it, and what it was going to cost him further before this was resolved. She thought about that dining table with one chair pulled out. 3 years of one. She picked up her pen. She worked until midnight. She was back at 7 the next morning. The news reached town before she did. This was how it always worked. This was the mechanism that had governed Eliza Hartwell's life from birth. The way information moved in Red Hollow. The way it was sorted and amplified and reshaped by the time it reached the ears that mattered. Someone had seen her wagon at the ranch. Someone had told someone else. By Thursday, the story that reached Mrs. Haskell's seamstress shop, which was also Red Hollow's most reliable information exchange, was that Eliza Hartwell had moved herself into Blackwood Ranch and was spending her nights there, alone with a widower. Mrs. Haskell came to find her on Thursday afternoon when Eliza rode into town to check on her father. "I'm not worried about you," Mrs. Haskell said before Eliza could say anything, "but I want you to know what's being said." "I can imagine what's being said. Richard Caldwell is saying it the loudest." Mrs. Haskell looked at her with the level regard of a woman who had navigated public opinion for 60 years. "He's saying you've manufactured a reason to attach yourself to Nathaniel Blackwood's fortune." Eliza felt the familiar burn in her face and refused it. "And what do you say?" she asked. Mrs. Haskell straightened her back. "I say the Hartwell girl went out there to do a job, and whatever Richard Caldwell's opinion is worth, can go straight into the same pile as his judgment of other people in general, which isn't worth much." She paused. "But you need to know he's saying it. Because he has his father's ear, and his father has loans with Blackwood Ranch." The implications settled over Eliza like cold water. If Arthur Caldwell, banker holder of multiple Blackwood business loans, decided that the situation at Blackwood Ranch had become questionable, he had leverage. He had the kind of leverage that could create problems even for a ranch the size of Blackwood's, if he chose to apply it at the wrong moment. Richard was not just insulting her. Richard was trying to destabilize the situation. "How long has this been going on?" Eliza asked. "Since Monday," Mrs. Haskell said. "Which is 3 days after you started working out there." 4 days after Victor Hale visited her in the records room. Eliza stood very still. She thought about Victor's easy smile, his practiced warmth, his offer to help her understand the records he had spent 4 years corrupting. She thought about the timeline. Victor Hale had gone to see Richard Caldwell. She did not yet know why those two men would be connected, but she knew with the certainty of someone who had learned to trust the patterns in numbers that this was not a coincidence. "I have to go back to the ranch," she said. "Be careful," Mrs. Haskell said. not as a pleasantry, as a warning. Eliza was already moving. She rode back to Blackwood Ranch faster than she'd come to town, and the whole 40 minutes she was turning the new information over and looking at it from every angle. Because if Richard Caldwell was connected to Victor Hale, the situation was not just about theft from one ranch. It was about something larger: land money, the careful dismantling of a powerful man's operation from the inside and the outside simultaneously. She arrived at the ranch as the sun was going down. Nathaniel was in the yard speaking to one of the hands. She went to him directly. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer honestly." He dismissed the hand with a look and turned to her. "All right. Does your father's estate have outstanding business with Arthur Caldwell's bank?" Nathaniel's expression shifted. "There are 2 loan agreements. Standard operating loans, both current on payments. Why? Because I believe Victor Hale has been communicating with someone about what I'm doing in the records room. And the timing aligns with something happening in town that's designed to make your situation with me look questionable." She looked at him steadily. "If Caldwell decides to call those loans early, citing concerns about the ranch's management." "He can't call them early without cause," Nathaniel said. "No, but he can make your life very difficult while he manufactures cause." She paused. "Victor Hale has been here 19 years. He knows where every financial pressure point on this ranch is. If he knows I'm close to having what I need, and I think he does, he will start using those pressure points." Nathaniel looked at her. "How close are you?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Eliza said. "I'll have the full documentation tomorrow." The night air between them carried the sharp cold of a Wyoming evening, coming down fast, and Nathaniel stood in it looking at her with that level, weathered gaze. "Then we have 1 day," he said. "1 day," she confirmed. He nodded once. "All right. What do you need from me?" This was she would think about this moment later, much later, when the whole story had already unfolded, and she could look back at the thread of it. This was the moment she understood that Nathaniel Blackwood was not a man who wasted time on reactions he could spend on action. Another man handed this information would have needed 10 minutes to absorb it, to be angry, to circle back to the shock of it, to make the situation about his own feelings before figuring out what to do. Nathaniel went straight to what to do. "I need the loan documents," she said. "Tonight. I need to review the terms before tomorrow morning, because if Caldwell's going to come at you, I want to know exactly where the lines are." "I'll get them," he said. He turned toward the house. "Nathaniel." He stopped. She had not called him by his given name before. It came out without the calculation she'd have applied if she'd had a second to think about it, straight and simple and honest, the way things came out when urgency stripped the politeness away. He turned back. "Whatever's in those records," she said, "whatever we find when we lay it all out tomorrow, you didn't cause this. You trusted someone who spent 19 years making himself trustworthy, and then he used that against you. That's his failure, not yours." Nathaniel Blackwood looked at her in the last light of the Wyoming evening, and for a moment his face was entirely unguarded. No foreman's composure, no wealthy man's control, just the face of someone who had needed to hear that, said plainly by someone whose opinion of him already mattered more than he had quite admitted to himself. "Thank you," he said. He went inside to get the loan documents. Eliza stood in the yard for just a moment. She had 1 day. She had 47 pages of documentation, 11 confirmed irregularities, a pattern spanning 4 years, and now the first edge of something even larger pressing against the boundary of what she could prove. She had 1 day to close it tight enough that Victor Hale couldn't pull a single thread loose. She went back to the records room. She did not sleep that night. By 4 in the morning she had it, all of it, every entry cross-referenced, every discrepancy documented, every supply invoice matched against the false amounts in Victor's books, every payment that had moved through Blackwood Ranch's accounts and arrived somewhere it was never supposed to go. She sat back in her chair. In the lamplight, the proof filled 12 full pages of her clearest writing. It was enough, It was more than enough. It was the kind of documentation that didn't leave room for maybe, or perhaps she made a mistake. She looked at what she had built across the work table, the careful, meticulous, undeniable record of a man's betrayal, and she thought about the morning that was coming, and Victor Hale walking into the yard, and Nathaniel's face when she showed him the full extent of what had been done to him. She thought about Richard Caldwell, spreading stories in town. She thought about her father's hands. She thought about that one chair at the dining table. And she thought about her own reflection in the dark window glass across the room, a woman who had spent 25 years being overlooked, sitting in the lamplight of a ranch that hadn't been saved yet, with the proof that might save it spread in front of her. Nobody in Red Hollow would have bet on this woman, that she thought was entirely their problem. She set her pen down. She closed the last notebook. She folded her hands on the table and waited for morning. Morning came the way mornings come after sleepless nights, not gradually, not kindly, but all at once with the full weight of everything that had to happen pressing down before the first light finished arriving. Eliza had not moved from the records room. She had reorganized the 12 pages of documentation into the order she would present them. She had written a clean summary at the front, 4 years, 9 months, 23 days of falsified entries. She had calculated the total 3 times to make certain she had not made an error, because the number was large enough that a mistake would undermine everything, and she could not afford to be wrong about a single figure when the rest of it was this damning. She heard May in the kitchen at 5:30. At 6, Nathaniel appeared in the records room doorway. He took one look at her, at the lamp still burning, the coat still on her shoulders, the coffee cup from last night untouched and cold, and he understood without being told that she had not slept. He did not say anything about that. "Is it done?" he asked. "It's done," she said. He came into the room and sat down across from her, the same chair as last night, and she slid the first page across the table to him and began. She did not soften it. She did not build to it slowly, or give him time to brace against each piece before the next one arrived. She had thought about this, had decided sometime around 3 in the morning when she was writing the final summary that a man who had already spent 2 years bracing against a truth he couldn't prove did not need the information delivered gently. He needed it delivered completely. So she told him everything, entry by entry, month by month, the pattern of it, how it escalated in the 2nd year, how it accelerated in the 3rd, the supply invoices that didn't match the deliveries, the cattle counts that existed in the records but not in reality, the payroll entries for workers who had left the ranch but whose wages kept being recorded, the false expense reports that ran through a purchasing account only Victor Hale had direct access to. Nathaniel sat perfectly still and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not react visibly to any single number. He looked at the pages she passed to him, and he read them with the concentrated attention of a man committing each line to permanent memory. When she finished, he sat back in his chair. The silence lasted long enough that Eliza felt the weight of it in her own chest. 4 years, he said. At minimum, she said. The records before that are incomplete, which may not be an accident. I can't prove what I can't document, but the pattern doesn't look like it started in year 1. Nathaniel looked at the summary page, at the total at the bottom. This is enough to destroy him, he said. It's enough to convict him, Eliza said carefully. Legally, in front of a judge. Same thing. Not exactly. One requires a courtroom. The other requires a decision. She met his eyes. But there's something else I need to tell you. Something I found at 2 o'clock this morning that I don't have fully documented yet. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. The purchasing account, Eliza said. The one only Victor had access to. The payments leaving that account don't all go to the same place. Most of them trace to supply vendors, fake ones. Vendors I can't find any evidence actually exist. But there's a second stream, smaller, more carefully hidden. She paused. It goes to a land acquisition account registered in Laramie under a name I don't recognize. A man named Clement Cross. Nathaniel said nothing. Do you know that name? Eliza asked. No. Neither does anyone I can ask without alerting Victor. She pressed her hands flat on the table. But a man who's been extracting money from your ranch for 4 years and routing part of it toward land acquisition in another county, he's not saving up for retirement, Nathaniel. He's building toward something. The silence was different now. Heavier. He wants to buy land, Nathaniel said slowly. Land that would have to come from somewhere. Land that would come from a ranch that failed, Eliza said. A ranch whose owner couldn't sustain the losses anymore and was forced to sell. The full shape of it landed between them. Victor Hale had not just been stealing from Blackwood Ranch. Victor Hale had been engineering its collapse. Nathaniel stood up from the chair. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders and the particular rigidity in them that was not anger yet, but was the thing that came before anger in a man who kept himself controlled the moment of absorbing something that changed the entire frame of the past 4 years. 19 years, he said. She waited. My father brought him on when I was 15. I watched that man work this land for 19 years. He turned around. His face was composed in the careful way of someone working very hard to keep it that way. He was at Clara's funeral. He stood right behind me at the grave and told me the ranch would be all right, that he would make sure of it. I know, Eliza said. He was already doing it by then, Nathaniel said. He was already? Yes. The word was as quiet as she could make it. Not a whisper. Just a word at its lowest honest volume, because there was nothing useful to say after that confirmation. And she understood that sometimes the only thing a person needed was not to be alone with a truth they couldn't take back. Nathaniel stood at the window for another 30 seconds. Then he came back to the table. He sat down. He picked up the summary page and looked at it again. And his face had done something, rearranged itself from grief into something colder and cleaner. The face of a man who had finished feeling what he needed to feel about this and was now deciding what to do. Victor arrives at 7, he said. I know. What do we do with this? Eliza looked at him steadily. We don't confront him here. Not yet. Not without a witness. If Victor understands you have this evidence and there are no witnesses, he has every incentive to destroy whatever he can get to and disappear before you can get legal authority involved. She paused. We need to get this documentation out of this building first. We need a copy somewhere he can't reach it. I can ride to the county recorder's office in Cheyenne. Not you. He'll notice if you leave. He's been watching this situation carefully enough that he sent someone to Richard Caldwell's ear within 4 days of my arrival. She looked at the documents. May. Nathaniel looked at her. Does May have family in Cheyenne? Eliza asked. Her sister. Then May can take a copy to her sister and hold it there while we handle the confrontation here. She met his eyes. I need you to trust me on the order of this. If we do it wrong, we lose the legal case. If we do it right, there's nowhere for him to go. Nathaniel looked at her across the table. The look lasted a long moment. I trust you, he said. 3 words. Quiet. No performance in them. Just the plain statement of a fact he had apparently decided on some point during the last 2 weeks that he was willing to say out loud. Eliza felt something move in her chest that she did not examine. All right, she said. Get May. They had 45 minutes before Victor Hale arrived for the morning. May took the copied documents without hesitation or questions, which told Eliza that May Dutton had been waiting a long time for something to be done about the situation, and was prepared to act the moment someone asked her to. My sister has a lockbox, May said, folding the copies into the interior of her coat. Nobody touches it. Ride safely, Eliza said. I'll be back before supper. May looked at her the same look she had given Eliza in the first days, the measuring look, except that now there was something resolved in it, instead of cautious. You're sure about this? I'm sure. May nodded once. She left through the kitchen. 11 minutes later, Victor Hale's boots came up the front steps. Eliza was back at the work table. The original documents were in the satchel under the table. The room looked exactly as it had looked for the past 2 weeks. Ledgers in orderly rows, notebooks stacked at the edge, the working surface clear except for the current page she was reviewing. Nothing had changed on the surface. Eliza was writing when Victor appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." She did not look up. He came into the room. This was the first time he had done that, come fully inside, rather than speaking from the doorway. Eliza kept her eyes on the page and felt him move toward the shelves, looking. "Making progress," he said pleasantly. "Slow work," she said. "These records are quite complex. I did warn you." He paused at the shelves. She could hear him scanning the ledgers, checking which ones had been moved, which were in different positions than they'd been yesterday. Cataloging. "I imagine you're finding that the losses really are as straightforward as I explained to Mr. Blackwood. Bad winter's market fluctuations." "I'm sure that's part of it," Eliza said agreeably. Victor was quiet for a moment. "And the rest," he said. She looked up then. She met his eyes with the same pleasant, mild expression she had been maintaining for 2 weeks. "I'll present my full findings to Mr. Blackwood when I've reviewed everything," she said. "I like to be thorough before I draw conclusions." Victor Hale looked at her. She looked at him. In the space between them, a very quiet war was being decided. "Of course," he said. His smile did not reach his eyes by even the small amount it usually managed. "That's very professional." He left. Eliza put her pen down. Her hand was completely steady. Her heart was not. But her hand was, and her hand was the part that mattered right now. She waited exactly 5 minutes. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in the yard, speaking to the hands, doing exactly what she had asked him to, maintaining the ordinary appearance of an ordinary morning. He looked at her when she came out, and she gave him the smallest nod that communicated he came in. "We're still on course." Nathaniel turned back to his hands without changing his expression. The morning stretched on, and then at 10:45, everything shifted. The sound of a wagon came up the ranch road. Not May, too early for May, and the sound was wrong, too heavy, more than one horse. Eliza was at the records room window when she heard it, and she could not see the road from that angle. But she heard Nathaniel's voice in the yard, and then a voice she recognized, and the recognition moved through her like cold water. Arthur Caldwell, Richard Caldwell's father, the banker. She was out of the records room and in the hall before she'd fully decided to move. She stopped at the edge of the entryway where she could hear the conversation from the front steps without being immediately visible. Arthur Caldwell was 60, white-haired, with the physical presence of a man who had held financial power in a region long enough to believe that the power was simply an extension of his natural authority over things. He was accompanied by a young man Eliza didn't know, and by Richard, who stood slightly behind his father, with the particular posture of a man who is enjoying a situation, but has the sense to let his father front it. "Nathaniel," Arthur Caldwell said with the warm firmness of a man conducting business he had decided was already concluded. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," Nathaniel said, "but go ahead." A beat of silence. Arthur had not expected that phrasing. "I'll be direct," Arthur said. "There's some concern in town about the situation out here. The management situation." "What situation specifically?" "The young woman you've brought in." Arthur's voice carried the careful neutrality of a man who has thought about how to frame something. "I understand the intent, but several people with interest in this ranch's stability feel that the arrangement raises questions. Professional questions." "Professional questions," Nathaniel repeated. "About judgment," Arthur said. "About whether the current management of Blackwood Ranch is stable, focused, running on sound decisions." Eliza understood now what this was. This was the pressure Victor had been building toward. He had fed information to Richard. Richard had fed it to his father, and Arthur Caldwell, who held 2 outstanding loans with Blackwood Ranch, had arrived to make a calculation about whether those loans were at risk and whether he should act accordingly. Victor was trying to create a crisis big enough that Nathaniel would have to deal with the bank before he could deal with the evidence. Eliza walked to the front door and opened it. Everyone on the steps looked at her. "Mr. Caldwell," she said in the same voice she had used at Margaret Caldwell's parlor the night this all began, clear, unhurried, not loud. "I'm Eliza Hartwell. I've been conducting an audit of Blackwood Ranch's financial records for the past 2 weeks." "Yes," Arthur said with the careful tone of a man deciding how to place her. "I'm aware. Then you'll be interested to know." Eliza said that the audit is nearly complete, and that its findings are significant enough that I expect the full documentation will be in front of the county magistrate's office within the next 48 hours. Silence. Richard Caldwell's expression changed. "What findings?" Arthur said. "I'm not at liberty to detail them before the legal process begins," Eliza said. "But I can tell you that Blackwood Ranch's financial difficulties are not the result of poor management. They're the result of deliberate criminal action, which means this ranch's underlying value and operational soundness are entirely intact." She looked at Arthur Caldwell with the specific, steady gaze she had been practicing for 25 years on men who needed to understand that she was not going to be dismissed. "I imagine that changes the nature of your concerns about the loans." Arthur Caldwell looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel said nothing. He didn't need to. Richard made a sound, a small, strangled sound of a man whose carefully arranged piece has just been removed from the board. "This is—" Richard started. "Richard." His father's voice was flat and final. Richard stopped. Arthur Caldwell looked at Eliza for a long moment. He was doing the thing bankers do, calculating, reassessing, finding the new position from which to operate, given information that had shifted the ground beneath his original position. "I see," he said finally. "I thought you would," Eliza said. Arthur Caldwell put his hat back on. He looked at Nathaniel. "I look forward to reviewing the documentation when it's available." "You'll have it," Nathaniel said. The Caldwells left. The wagon went back down the road. Nathaniel turned to look at Eliza on the steps. "You just told Arthur Caldwell we're 48 hours from the magistrate," he said. "Yes. Which means Victor is going to know within the hour that the situation has moved faster than he thought." "Yes. Which means we have less time than we planned." "Yes," Eliza said. "So we need to move now." She had known, even as she said the words to Arthur Caldwell, that she was compressing the timeline, that she was trading the advantage of more preparation for the advantage of speed, because once Richard carried that information back to Victor, Victor's first instinct would be to reach the records that Eliza hadn't reviewed yet, and do whatever damage he could. The one thing she hadn't counted on was how fast Victor would move. They were back inside the house, Nathaniel already reaching for his coat to ride for the sheriff in Rollins, when they heard the sound from the records room. Not a voice, not footsteps, the sound of a drawer. Nathaniel stopped moving. Eliza stopped breathing. Someone was in the records room. She moved first, not because she was braver, but because the rational part of her brain was already running the calculation. The documents were in her satchel under the table. If Victor was looking for them, he would find the satchel. If he found the satchel. She came through the records room door at a walk, not a run, because running would have told him she was afraid, and the one advantage she had in this moment was that she needed him to be the one who was afraid. Victor Hale was standing at the work table. He had her satchel in his hands. He looked up when she entered. For one full second, neither of them moved. Then Victor set the satchel down. He straightened up. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been caught doing exactly what he was doing, and has decided that the only available response is to go further in the same direction. "Looking for something," Eliza said. "These are my records," Victor said. His voice had lost the practiced warmth entirely. What was underneath it was harder and colder and more honest. 19 years of my work on this ranch. "They're Nathaniel Blackwood's records," she said, "and you know exactly what's in them." "You don't know what you're looking at," he said. "You're a shopkeeper's daughter. You have no idea how a ranch of this size operates. Losses are part of it. Bad years are part of it." "I know the difference between a loss and a theft," Eliza said. "I've been doing accounts since I was 14 years old, and I know that you know I know." Victor looked at her. His calculation was running. She could see it. He was measuring the distance to the door, measuring the weight of the satchel, measuring what she had and whether she had it somewhere he could still reach. "You can't prove anything that holds up," he said. "Accounting records are complicated. A competent man can offer explanations for every entry." "A competent man already tried that with me," Eliza said. "For 2 weeks. The explanations don't hold up, Victor, not against 12 pages of cross-reference documentation that I did not write carelessly." Victor took a step toward her. Eliza did not step back. She had thought about this moment somewhere around 4 in the morning when she was writing the final summary. She had thought about the possibility that Victor would not simply accept the evidence and fold. She had thought about what it meant to be a woman alone in a room with a man who had spent 4 years proving he was willing to take what he wanted. She had decided that morning that she was not going to be afraid of him. She was not going to pretend she wasn't afraid. She was going to stand in the fear and be still anyway, because that was the only move that worked. "Those documents," Victor said quietly, "belong here." "They've already left," Eliza said. "Everything you're looking for is already in the hands of someone you can't reach." Something moved through Victor's face. He looked at the satchel. He looked at her. And Nathaniel Blackwood walked through the door. He looked at the two of them. He looked at the satchel on the table and Victor's hand near it. His voice was very quiet when he spoke. "Victor," he said. Victor turned. "Step away from her," Nathaniel said. The 3 words carried nothing emotional. No anger, no drama. Just the flat, absolute authority of a man standing in his own house, telling someone where the line was. Victor stepped away. He stood in the center of the room, and for the first time in the 18 days since Eliza had arrived at Blackwood Ranch, the practiced ease left Victor Hale's body entirely. What replaced it was older and uglier and much more honest. "You brought a stranger into this house," Victor said to Nathaniel. "Into your ranch, into your father's records. Based on what?" "Because she answered back to some man at a party. Based on the fact that she's the first person I've trusted to tell me the truth," Nathaniel said. "And you believe her over 19 years of my service." "I believe the numbers," Nathaniel said. "She just read them." Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Eliza. The look he gave her then was not anger exactly. It was the particular expression of a man who had underestimated a specific person and was only now too late calculating what that had cost him. Not fear. Something colder. Recognition. "Clement Cross," Eliza said quietly. Victor went very still. "I know about the land account," she said. "I know about Laramie. I know about what you were building toward." She looked at him steadily. "The magistrate will know all of it within 48 hours. Victor Hale said nothing. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Eliza. And then he walked out of the room. They heard his boots in the hall, the front door, the steps. They heard his horse, then nothing. Eliza let out a breath she had been holding since she walked through the records room door. Her hands at her sides were shaking. She looked at them. She pressed them together to stop the shaking, and that was when Nathaniel crossed the room in 3 steps and put his hand over both of hers. He did not say anything. He just stood there close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold. Her body had gone while she was holding herself together, and he held her hands still between both of his, and she let him. "You're all right," he said. She nodded. She was not entirely certain that was true yet, but she was going to get there. "He's going to run," she said. "He won't get far," Nathaniel said. "The sheriff in Rawlins knows his name. I'll ride in an hour. You need to take the satchel." "I know." She pulled her hands back. She straightened up. She looked at him. He was still close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes, and his eyes were that October gray with something behind them that was not the careful composure of a man managing a crisis. Something warmer and more open than that. "You didn't step back," he said, "when he stepped toward you." "I thought about it," she said honestly. But you didn't. No. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. I'm beginning to think, he said carefully, that you are the most capable person I have ever employed. Eliza looked at him. Employed, she said. Something shifted in his expression. The word had landed in the space between them, and they both understood without either of them naming it that it was not quite the right word anymore. Or perhaps not the complete word. Perhaps there were other words that would have been more accurate, except that neither of them was ready to say those words, yet here in the records room an hour after the morning that had just happened. Eliza, he said. She waited. He looked at her. He didn't say anything else. She nodded once as if he had. Because she understood what he meant the way you can understand something that hasn't been said yet, the shape of it, the intention of it, the direction it was moving. Get the sheriff, she said. Bring him back tonight. Tonight, he agreed. He took the satchel. He left. Eliza stood alone in the records room. The ledgers were on their shelves. The notebooks were stacked at the edge of the table. Everything was in its place, organized and documented and proven, and Victor Hale was gone from this room and gone from this ranch, and in 48 hours, the magistrate would have everything he needed. She should have felt relief. She did feel relief somewhere underneath everything else. But underneath the relief, and underneath the residual cold of standing her ground against a man who had thought she would move, and underneath the complicated warmth of Nathaniel's hands over hers, underneath all of that, was the knowledge of what Clement Cross meant. Victor had not acted alone. There was land in Laramie. There was an account. There was a name she didn't know. The money had gone somewhere. And wherever it had gone for a reason, and that reason was not finished yet, just because Victor Hale had ridden away from Blackwood Ranch on a Wednesday morning. She looked at the shelves. She looked at the one remaining ledger she had not yet opened. She went to it. She pulled it from the shelf. She opened it to the first page, and she started reading. The last ledger was different from the others, and Eliza knew it within the first 3 pages. Not because the handwriting changed, it was still Victor's careful, practiced script, but because the structure changed. The other ledgers had been designed to look like ordinary accounting, with the theft woven into legitimate entries so carefully that a casual reader would never catch it. This one was different. This one was older, and the entries in it were not trying to hide inside the regular operation of the ranch. They were trying to hide something else entirely. She turned the pages carefully. The dates went back further than she had expected. 12 years. 13. She found the first Clement Cross entry on page 9, dated 1872, 4 years before Nathaniel had inherited the ranch from his father, 3 years before anyone had reason to suspect Victor Hale of anything. She sat back. 12 years. Victor had not started stealing when Nathaniel took over. He had started stealing under Nathaniel's father, Edmund Blackwood, and he had been doing it so carefully, so patiently for so long that by the time Edmund died and the ranch passed to his son, the machinery of it was already running and had been running for years. And then she found the second name. Not Clement Cross. A different name, a name she recognized. Her hand stopped on the page. She read the entry 3 times to make certain she was reading it correctly, because it was the kind of entry that changed everything, not just the shape of Victor's crime, but the shape of who was connected to it, and how deep the roots went, and why Richard Caldwell had been so quick to move against her the moment she arrived at this ranch. Arthur Caldwell. Not Richard. Arthur. The banker's name appeared in the ledger dated 9 years ago, in an entry that documented a payment not from the ranch's operating accounts, but from the Clement Cross land account to a private arrangement with the Caldwell Bank of Red Hollow. A private arrangement that had nothing to do with the ranch's legitimate loans. Eliza's hands were completely steady. Her mind was moving at a speed that felt almost separate from her body. Sorting, connecting, building the picture with the rapid, cold precision of someone who had just found the load-bearing piece of a structure that was much larger than she had been looking for. Victor Hale had not been acting alone. He had never been acting alone. Arthur Caldwell had been his partner for at least 9 years. The arrangement was elegant in the way that genuinely corrupt arrangements are elegant, mutually beneficial, mutually incriminating. Designed so that neither man could expose the other without exposing himself. Victor stole from the ranch and routed a portion through Clement Cross. Cross paid a percentage into a private account at Caldwell Bank that Arthur managed off the formal books. Arthur, in return, managed the Blackwood Ranch loans in ways that consistently created the appearance of financial difficulty. Interest adjustments, timing manipulations. The kind of small financial pressure that a banker applies so gradually that a borrower feels the weight of it without ever quite identifying the source. They had been squeezing Blackwood Ranch from the inside and the outside simultaneously, and they had been doing it for nearly a decade. She thought about Arthur Caldwell arriving at the ranch that morning, the careful neutrality of his voice, the way he had positioned his visit as concern for the loans, for the management stability, for the professional questions about her presence. He had not come out of concern. He had come because Victor had told him she was close, and he had needed to see for himself whether there was still time to intervene. She thought about Richard's voice the night everything started. Some women are simply what remains. She thought about how easy it had been for them to believe she was no threat. She closed the ledger. She stood up. She did not panic. She did not allow herself the luxury of feeling how large this was. She went straight to what she knew Nathaniel had written to Rollins for the sheriff with the documentation against Victor. May had copies at her sister's house in Cheyenne, but neither of those copies contained what she had just found because she had just found it, and she was alone in this house with information that Arthur Caldwell would do considerable damage to suppress. She needed to get this ledger out of the house. She needed to do it now before Arthur Caldwell understood she had found his name. She picked up the ledger. She crossed to the records room door and listened. The house was quiet. May was not back from Cheyenne yet. The ranch hands were outside. The house was empty except for her. She moved to the kitchen, to the back door, to the idea of riding into town before anyone understood why. She opened the back door. Richard Caldwell was standing on the step. She stopped. He looked at the ledger in her hands. His expression did what expressions do when someone sees something they were hoping not to see. It went very still, and then very quickly rearranged itself into something that was trying to be casual. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I came to apologize." Eliza did not move back from the doorway. She did not give him the space to step inside. She stood in the frame of the door and looked at him and thought very fast. Richard had not come to apologize. Richard had never apologized for anything in his life without a reason that benefited Richard. He was here because his father had sent him. Because Arthur Caldwell had understood after this morning's visit that the situation was moving and he needed eyes inside the ranch. "That's kind of you," Eliza said pleasantly. "Now isn't a good time." "I've been unfair to you," Richard said. He was doing the thing she had watched him do his whole life, deploying charm, the way a man deploys a tool with precision and without genuine feeling. "The things I said at my mother's gathering were wrong. I'd like to explain myself." "You don't need to explain yourself to me, Richard." "I'd like to try." He moved slightly toward the door. "Could we speak inside?" "No," Eliza said. The single word landed cleanly, and she watched him adjust. "Eliza." His voice shifted, lower, more direct. The charm dropped by about 30%, and what replaced it was something more honest, not kinder, but more honest. "I know what you found in those records. My father told me." She kept her face very still. "What your father told you," she said carefully, "is what your father knows, which may not be everything." Something moved behind Richard's eyes. She watched him calculate. He was not stupid. This was something she had always known about Richard Caldwell, that he was not stupid, which was what made him dangerous. He was a man with real intelligence and no particular moral structure to direct it, which meant he applied it entirely to his own advantage and was very good at it. "The ledger in your hands," he said quietly. She waited. "Whatever you think you found, you need to understand that some arrangements are more complicated than they look from the outside. Business arrangements between men who have worked together for decades." His voice was entirely controlled now. Careful. My father is not a criminal, Eliza. He's a businessman who made some flexible decisions in a difficult period. That's not the same thing. Stealing from a ranch and hiding it through a private bank account is not a flexible business decision, Eliza said. It's fraud. Richard's jaw tightened. You're going to make an enemy of a very powerful family, he said. Your family has been my enemy since before I had any idea why, she said. The difference is that now I know the reason. She stepped back and closed the door. She turned the lock. She stood there for a moment with her back against the door and the ledger pressed against her chest and the full understanding of what she was holding settling over her, like the physical weight of something she had not asked to carry. She had 30 seconds before Richard went around to the front of the house. She moved. She went back to the records room, opened the satchel, now empty of its documents, which Nathaniel had taken, and put the ledger inside. She added her notebook with the Clement Cross entries. She buckled the satchel. She heard the front door knocker. She ignored it. She went to the window at the side of the records room. She thought about what she had available to her. No horse she had ridden out on borrowed transportation, and Nathaniel had taken his horse to Rollins. The ranch hands were working the south pasture 40 minutes away by foot. May was in Cheyenne. She was alone in the house with evidence that implicated one of the most powerful men in the county, and that man's son was on the front step, and she had no way to ride anywhere. She was thinking through the options, genuinely thinking fast and cold and methodical, when she heard the second horse. Not Richard's horse on the front step. A different horse, coming up the ranch road from the east. She crossed to the hallway window. It was May. May Dutton coming back from Cheyenne 4 hours earlier than she'd said she would be riding with the urgency of someone who had received information on the road that made her change her timeline. Eliza went to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped outside before Richard could come around the building. May pulled up and looked at her face and read it the way women read faces when they have been paying attention for a long time. What happened? May said. How fast can you get back to Cheyenne? Eliza asked. May looked at the satchel. What's in there? Arthur Caldwell's name in Victor's ledger. Eliza held it up to her. 9 years of it. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. Give it here, May said. Eliza handed it up. Back door, she said. Richard Caldwell is at the front. May did not look toward the front of the house. She looked at Eliza. Are you safe here alone? Richard won't do anything that looks like what it is, Eliza said. He needs this to look like a business conversation. And if it stops looking like that, then I'll be louder than he expects, Eliza said. May held the satchel against her side. She looked at Eliza one more time, that long measuring look, and then she turned her horse and went back down the road the way she had come. Eliza watched her go. Then she turned, walked around the side of the house, and came face to face with Richard Caldwell on the front steps. I heard a horse, he said. He was looking toward the road. His expression had moved from controlled to something more urgent. May came back early, Eliza said. Richard looked at her. Where did she go? Back to her sister's, Eliza said. She forgot something. The lie came out clean and flat, the way lies come out when you have had 25 years of practice saying things in front of people who were waiting for you to falter. She had never been a dishonest person. But she had become, out of necessity, a person who could hold her face very still. Richard looked at her for a long moment. He did not quite believe her, but he could not prove she was lying. When is Nathaniel back? He asked. This evening, Eliza said. I'll wait. Suit yourself, Eliza said. She walked past him into the house. May left coffee in the kitchen. She went to the records room and sat down and picked up a ledger. One of the already reviewed ones, harmless documented, and opened it, and she sat there and read without reading while her heart did everything it wanted to do quietly inside her chest, and she waited for evening. Nathaniel came back at 6. He came back with Sheriff Dale Prentice of Carbon County, a lean, serious man of 50 who had the particular air of someone who had been doing his job long enough to understand that arriving prepared was the only way to arrive, and a deputy, and the paperwork Eliza had sent with him, which the magistrate in Rawlins had reviewed and found sufficient. Victor Hale had been located at a boarding house in Rawlins attempting to arrange transportation to Colorado. He was now in county custody. Nathaniel walked through the front door and found Richard Caldwell in his entryway and Eliza at the records room door, and he read the situation with the fast, accurate intelligence of a man who had spent a long day solving one crisis and had come home to find another one waiting. "Richard," he said, "why are you here?" "I came to speak to Miss Hartwell," Richard said. He looked at the sheriff. Something in his expression shifted a quick internal recalculation. "I came to apologize." "You came to find out what she knows," Nathaniel said. The directness of it landed like a flat stone in still water. Richard opened his mouth. "My father," he started. "Sheriff Prentice," Eliza said from the records room door. Everyone looked at her. "I have information relevant to the criminal matter you've opened regarding Victor Hale," she said. "Information that extends the conspiracy beyond Mr. Hale to a second party. The documentation is currently in Cheyenne being held securely." She looked at Prentice steadily. "I'll need to provide you with a full statement." Prentice looked at her. He looked at Richard. He was the kind of man who arrived at conclusions quickly and then stayed there. "I'll need everyone to remain available," he said. "I'm not under any obligation," Richard started. "Richard." Nathaniel's voice was very quiet. "Stop talking." Richard stopped. What followed was 3 hours that Eliza would later remember as the most precise and exhausting 3 hours of her life, not because they were frightening, though parts of them were, but because they required her to be completely exact about everything she said in front of a county sheriff, while simultaneously managing the fact that the most critical evidence was still in transit to Cheyenne. She gave her statement without the ledger. She described what she had found entry by entry from memory, and her memory, as it had always been, was exact. She gave dates, amounts, account references, the specific language of the entries that connected Arthur Caldwell's name to the Clement Cross transactions. Prentice listened without expression. Richard sat in the corner chair and said nothing for 2.5 hours, which was the longest Eliza had ever seen Richard Caldwell remain silent. When she finished, Prentice looked at his deputy. Something passed between them. "I'll need to speak with Arthur Caldwell," Prentice said. "My father is a respected—" Richard started. "Tomorrow morning," Prentice said as though Richard had not spoken. He looked at Nathaniel. "Nobody leaves the county tonight. That applies to the Caldwell family as well. I'll be clear about that when I speak to Arthur directly." He stood up. "Miss Hartwell, the documentation in Cheyenne. I'll have it in your hands by noon tomorrow," Eliza said. Prentice nodded. He looked at her for a moment, the careful measuring look of a man who has interviewed a great many people and developed strong instincts about which ones are telling the truth. "You've done careful work," he said. "I just read what was there," Eliza said. Prentice left with his deputy. Richard Caldwell stood up from his chair. The room was very quiet. He looked at Eliza. He looked at Nathaniel. His face had the particular quality of a man who has watched a situation he thought he could manage become something he cannot manage, and is deciding what position to take going forward. "I didn't know the extent of it," he said. Eliza looked at him. "I knew my father had an arrangement with Victor," Richard said. "I didn't know how far it went. I thought it was—" He stopped. He looked at the floor. "I thought it was just favorable loan terms. Business." "It was fraud," Nathaniel said. "I know that." Richard looked up. His voice had lost all the smooth confidence she had known her whole life. What was underneath was younger and less certain something that might have been the actual person inside all the performance finally visible because everything surrounding it had collapsed. "I was wrong to do what I did. With you." He looked at Eliza. "At the party, all of it. I was wrong." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the word that had followed her for 25 years. The last choice. The remainder. The woman left over when everyone worthier had already been selected. She thought about the fact that those words and the man who said them had set in motion the chain of events that brought Nathaniel Blackwood to her father's repair shop, that brought her to this ranch that put 12 pages of irrefutable documentation in front of a county sheriff. "I know you were wrong," she said. "That's enough for tonight." Richard left. The front door closed. The house went quiet in the particular way that houses go quiet when they have held a great deal of noise, and everyone carrying that noise has finally left. Nathaniel stood in the entryway. Eliza stood in the records room door. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "May has the ledger," she said. "I know. She sent word from the road." "Arthur Caldwell will face what he's built," Nathaniel said. "With or without Richard's version of events." "Yes." Another silence. He moved toward her. Not all the way across the entryway, just enough that the distance between them changed from the distance of two people discussing a situation to the distance of two people who have been through something together and are on the other side of it. "You found something I didn't send you to find," he said. "I found what was there to find," she said. "Arthur Caldwell." He said the name like he was setting it down deliberately with the specific effort of a man deciding what to do with information that was also a kind of grief. Arthur Caldwell had held the Blackwood loans for 15 years, had attended Edmund Blackwood's funeral, had extended sympathies and credit to a son who trusted him. "How long has he been a part of it?" "9 years that I can document," Eliza said. Nathaniel pressed his hand briefly to the wall, the way you press against something solid when you need to verify that solid things still exist. 9 years, he said. "You didn't know," she said. "And that matters." He looked at her. "It doesn't feel like it matters right now." "I know." She moved toward him one step too, and she stopped at the distance that felt honest. "But it does. You trusted people who had decided to betray you before you ever had a chance to be betrayed. That's different from being careless. That's different from making a mistake. You did nothing wrong." Nathaniel looked at her. Something in his face moved slowly, the way things move in a man who keeps very careful control of what his face reveals, a loosening of something that had been held tight for a long time. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "For this, for all of it." He paused. "And I find that I don't want to thank you. That it feels like the wrong word for what I want to say." Eliza's heart did the undignified thing again. "What's the right word?" she asked. Nathaniel looked at her. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I think I'd like the opportunity to find it." She looked at him. In the doorway of the records room of Blackwood Ranch, with 12 pages of proof already in a magistrate's hands, and a second ledger on its way from Cheyenne and Arthur Caldwell's name, about to meet the consequences of 9 years of careful wrongdoing in the middle of all of that, Eliza Hartwell felt something she had stopped expecting to feel years ago. Not rescued, not chosen by default or proximity or convenience. Seen. Completely accurately specifically seen by a man who had watched her stand still in a room that expected her to break and had walked in anyway. "You have time," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the Wyoming night was coming down fast and cold and enormous, the way it always did, indifferent to everything below it, and beautiful in exactly that indifference. Somewhere on the road to Cheyenne, May Dutton was carrying a ledger that would bring down 2 men who had decided that a ranch and the man who ran it were simply resources to be harvested. Tomorrow, the sheriff would go to Arthur Caldwell's door. Tomorrow, the county magistrate would receive 12 pages and 1 ledger, and the written testimony of a woman who had been dismissed and underestimated and overlooked so consistently that no one had thought to protect their secrets from her. Tomorrow, Red Hollow would understand what had been happening inside its most powerful walls. But tonight, the house was quiet, and the man who owned it was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and for the first time in Eliza Hartwell's 25 years, the quiet felt like something that belonged to her. She did not rush it. She let it be what it was. May arrived back from Cheyenne the next morning at 11:47. Eliza knew the exact time because she had been watching the road from the records room window since 9, not because she was afraid the fear had done what fear does. After the worst moment passes, it had settled into something lower and quieter. But because she needed the ledger in Prentice's hands before noon, and she had promised that, and Eliza Hartwell did not make promises she did not keep. May came through the front door and put the satchel on the records room table without ceremony. "My sister sends her regards," May said, "and says if you ever need a place to stay in Cheyenne, her door is open." "Tell her thank you," Eliza said. She opened the satchel. The ledger was exactly as she had handed it up, undamaged, intact, every page in its order. She checked the entries she had memorized the night before. Arthur Caldwell's name, the dates, the account references, all of it still there. All of it still true. "Nathaniel rode to meet Prentice an hour ago," May said. "He said to send word when you had it." "Send word now," Eliza said. May left. Eliza sat with the ledger in front of her and felt the weight of 12 years inside it. 12 years of a crime conducted with patience and precision, and the complete confidence of men who believed they had chosen their target carefully enough that no one capable of stopping them would ever look. They had chosen wrong. She closed the ledger. She put it in the satchel. She went to find a horse. Sheriff Prentice received the documentation at 12:14 in the afternoon in the front room of the Rawlins magistrate's office, where he had been meeting with the magistrate since 10 o'clock that morning. Nathaniel was already there. He looked at Eliza when she came through the door, and the look he gave her said everything that the previous evening's quiet had already said. That he was glad she was there, that he had been waiting for her. Specifically, that glad was perhaps not the complete word for what he was. Prentice opened the satchel. He read. The magistrate read over his shoulder. The room was very quiet for 4 minutes. Then Prentice looked up. "Arthur Caldwell is in the building," he said. "He came in voluntarily this morning with his attorney. He believes he's here to discuss the Blackwood loan terms." Eliza felt the particular sensation of a situation arriving at the moment it had been building toward. "He doesn't know about the ledger," she said. "He doesn't know about the ledger," Prentice confirmed. Nathaniel looked at her. "Do you want to be there?" She thought about the parlor gathering, the tray of drinks, the silence of 30 people deciding how to arrange their faces. She thought about the long walk home and her father's cough and the ledger on the kitchen table that told a story about 3 months and then nothing. She thought about 12 years of entries in Victor Hale's handwriting. "Yes?" she said. Arthur Caldwell was brought into the room. He came in with the confident bearing of a man who has been summoned and considers the summoning itself a formality, the kind of man whose relationship with official proceedings had always been conducted from a position of advantage, who was accustomed to situations resolving in his favor because he had spent his life ensuring they were structured that way. He saw Nathaniel first, then Prentice, then Eliza standing beside the table with the open ledger in front of her. Something happened to his face. It was very small and very fast, and a person who was not specifically watching for it would have missed it entirely. But Eliza was specifically watching. She saw the exact moment Arthur Caldwell's confidence met the reality of what was on that table and understood that the reality was not something he could manage his way around. It lasted less than a second. Then his face rearranged itself into something careful and attentive and professionally composed. "Nathaniel," he said, "I'm glad we have the opportunity to—" "Mr. Caldwell," Prentice said. "Please sit down." Arthur sat. Prentice put the ledger on the table in front of him. He opened it to the first page with Arthur's name. Arthur looked at it. He said nothing. "I'd like you to explain this entry," Prentice said, dated March 1872, payment from the Clement Cross account to a private arrangement at Caldwell Bank. Your signature on the receiving end. The attorney beside Arthur put his hand on his client's arm. Arthur looked at the entry for a long moment. Then he looked up. He looked at Eliza, not at Prentice, not at Nathaniel, at Eliza. And what he said next was something she had not expected. "How did you find it?" he asked. Not a denial, not an explanation. Genuine curiosity, the question of a man who had believed his architecture was sound and was now sincerely interested in understanding where the flaw had been. "You buried it well," Eliza said. "But you buried it inside Victor's system. And Victor's system had a pattern." She paused. Patterns are readable if you know what to look for. Victor said. Arthur stopped. He pressed his lips together. Victor said I wouldn't be a problem. Eliza said quietly. He was wrong. The attorney said something low and urgent in Arthur's ear. Arthur did not respond to it. He looked at Eliza with the expression of a man who had arrived too late at a genuine assessment of something he had badly miscalculated. You're the Hartwell girl, he said. Thomas's daughter. Yes. I've known your father for 20 years. I know, Eliza said. He repaired your bank's furniture. He never once overcharged you. She held his gaze. He raised me to do honest work. I did. Arthur Caldwell looked at the ledger. He looked at Prentice. He looked at his attorney. And then, Arthur Caldwell, the most powerful banker in Red Hollow, who had managed his position and his reputation and his connections with careful precision for 30 years, straightened in his chair and began to talk. Not because he had decided to confess, because he had decided that Victor Hale was not worth protecting. The statement took 2 hours. Eliza sat through all of it. She learned things she had not known, things even the ledger hadn't told her. She learned that the land in Laramie under Clement Cross had already been partially purchased. She learned that the plan had been to acquire enough acreage adjacent to Blackwood Ranch that when the ranch finally collapsed under the engineered financial pressure, the surrounding land could be consolidated and sold as a package, not to a local buyer, but to an Eastern land company that had been making inquiries about large Wyoming Territory holdings for 3 years. An Eastern land company in which Arthur Caldwell had a private investment stake. The architecture of it was extraordinary. Eliza sat there and listened to it unfold and felt beneath the appropriate anger something that was almost admiration for the audacity, and then felt the admiration curdle immediately when she thought about Nathaniel eating alone at a dining table for 3 years while the ranch his father built was being systematically hollowed out around him. When Arthur finished, Prentice dismissed him into formal custody. The room emptied down to 3 people. Nathaniel had not spoken during the 2 hours. He had sat very still in the chair beside Eliza and listened with his hands flat on his thighs, in the way she had come to recognize as what he did when he was holding himself together through something that required holding. When the door closed behind Prentice, he sat back. The silence lasted a long time. The land in Laramie, he said. It can be reclaimed, Eliza said. The purchases were made with stolen funds. The magistrate will... I know what the magistrate will do. He looked at the ceiling, then back at her. I'm not thinking about the land right now. She looked at him. I'm thinking about the fact that if you hadn't walked into that records room, he said, none of this would have ended differently than they planned. The ranch would have kept bleeding. The loans would have been called at the worst possible time. I would have had to sell, and I would have never known why. He paused. I would have spent the rest of my life believing I had simply failed. You didn't fail, Eliza said. I know that now. He looked at her. Because of you. She held his gaze. I didn't do it for you, she said honestly. Not at the beginning. I did it because I'm good at it, and someone finally gave me somewhere to do it. He almost smiled. I know. But somewhere in the middle, she said, and stopped. Somewhere in the middle, he said. She looked at him. It stopped being only about the numbers, she said. The room was very quiet. Nathaniel Blackwood leaned forward in his chair, closed the distance that was left between them, and held her gaze the way he had been holding it since the first night in the records room when he asked if it was as bad as he thought, and she told him it was worse. What was it about? He asked. Eliza did not look away. I'll tell you, she said when we're not in a magistrate's office. He did smile, then the full unguarded smile that she had seen exactly twice before, and that looked nothing like the controlled, polite expression he showed the rest of the world. It was the smile of a man who had forgotten he still had it. All right, he said. Let's go home. The word landed between them. Home. Neither of them addressed it directly, but neither of them corrected it. The news reached Red Hollow before they did. This was how it always worked, the mechanism that had governed Eliza's life from birth, the way information moved through a small town. But this time the information was different. This time, the information was not about what Eliza Hartwell lacked, or what she represented to the people who needed someone to look down on. This time, the information was about Arthur Caldwell being held in the magistrate's office in Rawlins, about Victor Hale, already in county custody, about 12 pages of documentation and one ledger that had dismantled 12 years of calculated crime, about who had found it. Mrs. Haskell was waiting on the front steps of the repair shop when Eliza came to see her father that evening. She did not say anything for a moment when Eliza got down from the wagon. She looked at her the long measuring look, and then she opened her arms. Eliza walked into them. She did not cry. She had not cried through any of it. Not the morning Victor stepped toward her in the records room. Not the afternoon Richard arrived at the back door. Not the 2 hours of Arthur Caldwell's statement. She had been too focused for crying, and then too tired for it, and then somehow the moment for it had passed. But she let Mrs. Haskell hold on for a moment, and she held on back, and that was close enough. "Your father's been hearing the news all evening," Mrs. Haskell said. "He's going to need you to explain it properly before his imagination makes it worse." "Is he all right?" "He's proud," Mrs. Haskell said, which in Thomas Hartwell's case looks exactly like worry, but is actually the opposite. Eliza went inside. Thomas Hartwell was in his chair by the window, with his hands on his knees, and his face doing the complicated thing it did when he was feeling more than he planned to express. He looked at his daughter when she came through the door, and he looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "Yes, Papa." "They're saying—" He stopped. "There are a great many things being said in this town tonight. Most of them are true," she said. She sat down across from him. "I found what was wrong with the ranch. I documented it. I gave it to the sheriff. Arthur Caldwell and Victor Hale will face a trial." She looked at him steadily. "It's done." Thomas looked at his hands. "You could have been hurt," he said. "I wasn't. Victor Hale is not a man who—" "Papa." She reached out and put her hand over his. "I was careful. I was smart. And I was not alone." She paused. "Nathaniel trusted me to know what I was doing. That mattered." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Nathaniel," he said. The name carried a weight that was not the weight of the rancher's reputation or the size of his holdings. A father's weight. Is that how it is? Eliza thought about the magistrate's office. The word home landing between them and staying there. "I don't know yet what it is exactly," she said honestly, "but it's something." Thomas Hartwell looked at his daughter. "Your mother would have had things to say about all of this," he said. "Good things or cautionary things." He thought about it. "Both," he said. She would have said, "Be careful with your heart." And then she would have said, "Don't be too careful." She contradicted herself frequently. He paused. She was usually right both times. Eliza smiled, for the first time in days, genuinely freely, without managing it. Thomas watched her smile. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." The trial of Victor Hale and Arthur Caldwell lasted 11 days. Eliza testified for 4 of them. She stood in the county courthouse in Rawlins and answered questions from the prosecution and from the defense with the same clarity and steadiness she had brought to the records room on the first morning. No hesitation, no softening, no shaping of the truth toward any version of it that was easier than the actual version. She was cross-examined by Arthur Caldwell's attorney, who was skilled and aggressive and had clearly been told that the weakest point of the prosecution's case was that it rested significantly on the analysis of a woman with no formal credentials in accounting or law. He made this argument explicitly on the second day of her testimony. "Miss Hartwell," he said in the particular tone of a man who believes he is about to establish something devastating, "you have no formal training in accounting, no legal qualifications, no professional certification of any kind. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Eliza said. And yet you're asking this court to accept your analysis of 12 years of complex financial records as definitive. I'm asking this court to read the records themselves, Eliza said. My analysis is a guide to what's there. The entries speak for themselves. But your interpretation is verifiable, she said. Every figure I cited is in the ledgers. Every cross-reference I made is documented in my notebooks, which are in evidence. Any person in this room with patience and a pen can check my work entry by entry and arrive at the same numbers. She looked at him steadily. If I made an error, show it to me. I will correct it immediately. The attorney looked at her. He did not show her an error, because there were none. The verdict came on the 11th day. Victor Hale, guilty on 8 counts. Arthur Caldwell, guilty on 6. The courtroom was full. The courtroom was full of people from Red Hollow who had made the trip to Rawlins, which meant the courtroom was full of people who had known Eliza Hartwell her entire life, who had watched her carry trays at parties and manage her father's failing accounts, and absorb the particular cruelty of a community that had decided she was not worth choosing. When the verdict was read, the room was very quiet. Then Mrs. Haskell started clapping. She was the first one, and she did not wait to see if anyone joined her. She clapped with the decisive energy of a woman who has been waiting a long time to do exactly this. And after 3 seconds, the room joined her, and the sound of it filled the courthouse in Rawlins, Wyoming Territory on a Tuesday afternoon in the spring of 1886. Eliza sat at the prosecution's table. She did not perform modesty, and she did not perform triumph. She sat there and let the sound wash over her, and she thought about the very first morning she had sat down in Nathaniel Blackwood's records room with a fresh notebook and an open ledger, and how the room had smelled like old paper and undisturbed years, and how she had found the first irregularity on page 3, and felt the particular sharpening that happened when she encountered a problem worth solving. She thought about what it had felt like to be exactly the right person in exactly the right place. It felt, she thought, like this. Nathaniel found her outside on the courthouse steps afterward, in the specific noise and movement of a crowd dispersing. He came through the people the way he moved through most things, directly, without uncertainty about his destination. He stopped in front of her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. He looked at her. "Come back to the ranch." "I have to check on my father." "Bring your father," he said. "May has been cooking for an army since Monday. There's enough food for Thomas 3 times over." She looked at him. "Nathaniel." "Eliza." She almost laughed. "What are you doing?" "I'm asking you to come home," he said. Very simply. No elaboration, no performance. Just the plain statement of what he meant. "Both of you, tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the dining table with one chair pulled out. The single coffee cup from a morning nobody had shared with him. The library full of books he'd had no one to discuss with. She thought about her father's hands and the repair shop's 3-month window that was no longer a crisis, because Nathaniel had paid her fairly, and the debts were manageable now, and the future looked different than it had in January. She thought about what she had told her father. "I don't know yet what it is exactly, but it's something." "All right," she said. The something, it turned out, did not take much longer to become something with a name. It happened on an evening 6 weeks after the trial in the library of Blackwood Ranch, a room Eliza had discovered genuinely delighted her, both because of the books and because Nathaniel's relationship with them was exactly what she would have predicted from a man who read while eating breakfast alone and didn't care whether anyone knew it. They were reading in the same room for the 3rd time that week, which had become a thing that happened without either of them deciding it would happen. Eliza with whatever she'd pulled from the shelf, and Nathaniel with whatever he'd been working through. And the silence between them was the particular good silence of 2 people who were comfortable with each other's presence without needing to fill every moment of it. Nathaniel closed his book. He looked at her. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked up. "The night Victor came into the records room," he said. "When I came through the door and he was standing there, you weren't afraid." "I was afraid," she said. "I was very afraid." "You didn't show it." "Showing it wouldn't have helped anything. He looked at her in the quiet, direct way. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "About what it takes to stand still when everything in you wants to move." He paused. "I've been thinking about it in a different context lately." She waited. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said carefully, "that I have spent 3 years being very still about things that should have been allowed to move." Eliza set her book down. "Clara," she said. "Clara." He said his wife's name the way he always said it, with honesty and without drama, the name of someone real and gone who deserved to be spoken of truthfully. "I loved her. That doesn't change. But she's been gone 3 years, and I've been treating her absence like a reason to stay in one place." He looked at Eliza. "You make me want to move again." Eliza Hartwell looked at Nathaniel Blackwood in the lamplight of his library. She thought about 25 years of hearing that she was not enough. Not pretty enough, not chosen enough, not worth the first look, let alone the second. She thought about the particular loneliness of being capable and having nowhere to put it. She thought about the night she had sat at her kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and a ledger full of bad news and something in her chest that would not stop reaching toward a future she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. She thought about what it felt like when someone looked at you and saw what was actually there. "You're not asking me to replace her," she said. "No," he said. "I'm asking you to stand beside me, exactly as you are, which is more than I knew to look for." He paused. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to make a life with me, Eliza. This ranch, this place, with me." She looked at him. "You understand," she said, "that I will always tell you when the numbers are wrong. I'm counting on it. And when other things are wrong, not just numbers. Especially then. And my father has a room here whenever he wants it," Nathaniel said. "May has already decided which one." She almost laughed again. "You talked to May before you talked to me." "May told me I was being slow," he said. "She has strong opinions about timelines." Eliza looked at him. She thought about the first morning she had ridden out to Blackwood Ranch, borrowed horse and unfine dress, and the complete, settled conviction that she was doing the right thing. She thought about how that conviction had been the truest thing she had known about herself for a long time, that she was someone who moved toward what was right, even when what was right was hard and uncertain, and nobody was watching to give her credit for it. She looked at Nathaniel. "Yes," she said. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. His hand was warm and calloused and steady, the hand of a man who built things and fixed things and stayed. They sat there in the library for a long time without speaking. Neither of them needed to. On the morning of their wedding, Red Hollow filled in a way it had not filled in years, not for a trial, not for a scandal, but for something that felt to the people standing in the church like a correction. Like a story arriving at the ending it had always been meant to have. Thomas Hartwell sat in the front row. His hands rested on his knees, and they hurt as they always hurt now, but his face was the face of a man who had watched his daughter become fully herself and found the experience worth every hard year that preceded it. Mrs. Haskell sat behind him. She was not crying because Mrs. Haskell did not cry at weddings. She was, however, holding her handkerchief with considerably more grip than a handkerchief required. May stood near the back and made no effort to compose her expression because May had long since stopped performing emotions she didn't have and performing the absence of emotions she did. Richard Caldwell was not there. Richard had left Red Hollow 3 weeks after his father's sentencing, and where he had gone was not a subject that received much attention from the people he'd left behind. There were other things to think about. The words were short and honest, the way Eliza had asked for them to be. When they were finished, Nathaniel held her hand and looked at her with the October gray eyes that she had been reading correctly since the first evening he walked through a parlor door and said the truest thing anyone in that room had said all night. He leaned close. "They called you the last choice," he said quietly. Eliza looked at him. "And you proved," she said, "that they never understood what they were looking at." He held her hand tighter. Outside, Red Hollow kept moving, the way small towns keep moving forward, always forward, through seasons and years, and the long accumulation of ordinary days that became in the end the shape of a life. Inside, Eliza Hartwell Blackwood stood in the front of a church full of people who had underestimated her for 25 years, and she felt nothing like vindication. Vindication was too small a word, too thin, too focused on the people who had been wrong rather than on everything that was right. What she felt was simpler than that. She felt like a woman who had done honest work and told the truth, and stood still when standing still was the hardest thing, and had arrived through all of it exactly where she belonged. Not because anyone had finally chosen her, because she had never once stopped being worth choosing, and the man beside her had simply been paying attention.